Hi, I am not a capitalist. I'm a Marxist. And say,
If you've been listening to the terms Marxist and communist being thrown around this election, even college students proudly professing that they are Marxists, I'm going to tell you what Marxism and communism is and why you should be a little bit more concerned about it. So, a guy named Karl Marx and his pal Engels wrote something called the Communist Manifesto. It was an economic plan that was meant to rival capitalism. The only problem with that is that Marx is not an economist, nor was he ever. He actually was a jobless kind of oaf that borrowed money from his family and friends until the day he died, even after getting married and having children. I'll tell you a little bit more about him. This devil right here is Karl Marx. I'm going to tell you about some important details about Marx's life, and I'll tell you why it's important afterwards. Marx was an alcoholic who never washed. Boils covered his body, preventing him from sitting down. He refused to work and drove his family to destitution, causing the death of his two sons for exposure and illness. He raped his unpaid maid and had Engels subsidize their illegitimate child. How did he have a maid if he had no job and had no money? When his parents got tired of giving him money, they sent him a maid to help take care of his kids. So he raped that maid that was sent to him. Not unlike Kamala's husband, just throwing that out there. He wrote poetry romanticizing the ingesting of poison, the method by which two of his daughters would later commit suicide. I wonder if that had any effect. He also wrote a play about a man playing the violin to his sweetheart in order to summon the devil. He was also called in letters between him and his father and his children, different things like demon, devil, possessed by the devil, things you don't want to be called. One of those daughters Marx disowned for marrying a Cuban man, racist too, who Marx insulted as Negrillo and the gorilla. Marx was also explicitly genocidal, calling the revolutionary terror theft and murder against the ill-defined bourgeoisie. And bourgeoisie is basically what he called capitalist elites. He called the working class proletariats. He said the next attempt of the French Revolution would be so bloody that beside it, the French Revolution would be child's play. He forecast a dictatorship would inevitably arise from his bloody revolution, his communist revolution, and require absolute power to collectivize and redistribute property to achieve communism. He idolized Mephistopheles from Faust, insisting that everything that exists deserves to perish. The basic idea of his communist revolution was to overthrow the existing capitalist government so that everything could be replaced by his communist utopia. The reason I told you about his personal life and the kind of person he was is because I want you to understand this man was not an economist. And his economic plan, communism, has caused death, millions and millions of deaths, all over the world. Every place this has been attempted, it has failed. So a person nowadays saying, oh, it's just never been tried right. Yes, it has, and it failed. This guy is important too. This guy right here is Herbert Marcuse. He was born in Germany and later became a professor at a California college here in the US, which that is when he becomes important to the current discussion. Herbert Marcuse decided that the reason that the revolution wasn't happening in America was because Americans were too happy. As long as we could pay our bills and take care of our families, we were good. We weren't going to revolt. That's what he thought. So instead of it being rich versus poor, elites versus the working class, he changed it to oppressed versus oppressor. Sound familiar? This man, Herbert Marcuse, coined the slow march through the institutions, which is basically slowly pumping students' soft brains with Marxist ideology slowly over time to get his revolution. He wanted to radicalize elite college students and disenfranchised blacks coming out of the civil rights movement and use them to agitate them, radicalize them for his revolution to bring capitalism down and install communism. As a college professor, he would even help stage protests and knock down the doors when they turned into riots. While he determined that the American working class was happy, he did not consider them free. He thought we had a false freedom and we wouldn't have true freedom until there was a revolution and communism. Following Herbert Marcuse's lead and rhetoric, the Weathermen Underground was created. The Weathermen Underground was a radical offshoot of SDS, Students for a Democratic Society. The following is from FBI.org. On January 29th, 1975, an explosion rocked the headquarters of the U.S. Senate Department in Washington, D.C. No one was hurt, but the damage was extensive, impacting 20 offices on three separate floors. Hours later, another bomb was found at a military induction center in Oakland, California, and safely detonated. A domestic terrorist group called the Weather Underground claimed responsibility for both bombs, originally called the Weatherman or the Weathermen, a name taken from the line of a Bob Dylan song. The Weather Underground was a small, violent offshoot of Students for a Democratic Society, or SDS, a group created in the turbulent 60s to promote social change. When SDS collapsed in 1969, the Weather Underground stepped forward, inspired by the communist ideologies and embracing violence and crime as a way to protest the Vietnam War, racism, and other left-wing aims. Sound familiar? Our intention is to disrupt the empire, to incapacitate it, to put pressure on the cracks. That's a quote. Claimed the group 1974 manifesto, Prairie Fire. By the next year, the group had claimed credit for 25 bombings, including the U.S. Capitol, the Pentagon, and the California Attorney General's office, and a New York City police station. Sound familiar? The FBI doggedly pursued these terrorists as their attacks mounted. Many members were identified, but their small numbers and guerrilla tactics helped them hide under assumed identities. In 1978, the Bureau arrested 5 members who were plotting to bomb a politician's office. Others were captured after 2 policemen and a Brinks driver were murdered in botched armored car robberies in Nanuet, New York in 1981. Key to disrupting the group for good was the newly created FBI New York City Police Anti-Terrorist Task Force. It brought together the strengths of both organizations and focused them on these domestic terrorists. The task force, domestic terrorists, enemy from within, some might say. The task force and others like it paved the way for today's intelligence resources to combat today's terrorist threats. By the mid-'80s, the Weather Underground was essentially history. Still, several of these fugitives were able to successfully hide themselves for decades, emerging only in recent years to answer further crimes. And remember, some of them became college professors and continued on the tradition, and others were wealthy college elites, or the children of wealthy college elites, so they just bought properties and retired from activism. After cutting deals with the FBI, of course. Fast forward to today, just replace SDS and Weather Underground with Antifa and BLM, and we have the exact same ingredients. And for those of you who don't know what Antifa stands for anti-fascist. It's a far-left communist or anarchist group which advocates for social revolution strengthened by direct action, typically against perceived fascist or right-wing organizations. And who's protecting BLM and Antifa? It's not Trump. And what do these organizations preach? That capitalism is the enemy. CRT, that our entire system is inherently racist and therefore there needs to be a revolution to change it. They use the exact same language, calling right-wingers fascists and Nazis, and turn up the heat on racial tensions. We don't have Vietnam, but guess what? We have Israel and Palestine. And guess what they're protesting for on college campuses? Add in some Islamophobia, and we've got, again, the exact same ingredients. If you look up the definition for Antifa, you'll find a political protest movement comprising autonomous groups affiliated by their militant opposition to fascism and other forms of extreme right-wing ideology. Crazy, right? As my last video shows, Trump isn't actually a fascist. If anyone's a fascist, it's Kamala. And yet these people are calling us fascists, calling us Nazis. Why do you think that is? It's so that they have a reason to riot and rebel and cause their revolution. Because down with capitalism, right? It's working out great for China, North Korea, Cuba. The list goes on. So from now on, when you hear college students proudly state that they're a communist or Marxist, or when a lefty goes, do you even know what Marxism means? Do you even know what communism is? Now you do. I promise they will block you once you answer their question. Happens to me all the time.